Before 2026 begins, there is something more important than setting goals, more powerful than making plans, and deeper than writing resolutions. It is the act of placing your life, completely, deliberately, and without reservation, into the hands of God. Time is moving forward whether we are ready or not. Days turn into months, months into years, and suddenly we find ourselves standing at the edge of a new season. Standing there, many hearts are heavy. Some are carrying unanswered prayers. Some are tired from battles that did not end the way they expected. Some are afraid because the future feels uncertain. But uncertainty is not an enemy to faith. It is the doorway where trust is born. Before 2026 begins, God is not asking you to have everything figured out. He is asking you to surrender what you cannot control. Faith does not begin where certainty exists. Faith begins where human strength ends. When you say, God, I leave everything to you, you are not giving up. You are stepping into divine order. Prayer is not a ritual to impress heaven. Prayer is alignment. When you pray, your spirit lines up with God's will, your heart becomes sensitive to His voice, and your mind is renewed with His promises. The future may be unknown to you, but it is already known to God. He is not surprised by what is coming in 2026. He is already there. Many people enter a new year carrying the same burdens from the old one, the same fears, the same regrets, the same disappointments. But tonight, before 2026 begins, God is inviting you to put those burdens down. Not tomorrow, not when things improve, now. Because worry is a signal that we are trying to do God's job for Him. Leaving everything to God does not mean you stop working or dreaming. It means you stop worrying about outcomes you cannot control. It means you trust that God's timing is better than your urgency. His wisdom is greater than your understanding, and His plans are higher than your expectations. Some doors closed in the past year, and you wondered why. Some prayers were delayed, and you felt forgotten. But delay is not denial, and silence is not absence. God often works in ways that are invisible before they become undeniable. What looks like waiting is often preparation. Before 2026 begins, pray not just for blessings, but for alignment. Pray not just for success, but for obedience. Pray not just for answers, but for peace. When your heart is at peace, even storms lose their power over you. There is a difference between saying, God, help me, and saying, God, I trust you. Help ask for intervention. Trust hands over control. And when you truly trust God, fear loses its voice, anxiety loosens its grip, and hope begins to rise again. God is not limited by your past mistakes. He is not intimidated by your current struggles. He is not confused about your future. When you place everything in His hands, you place it in the safest place it can be. So before 2026 begins, take this moment seriously. Breathe, release, surrender. Say with confidence, Lord, my life is yours. My family is yours. My future is yours. I will walk forward in faith, not fear. I will trust you even when I do not understand. When you leave everything to God, you don't lose control. You gain peace. And peace is the greatest foundation you can carry into a new year. Faith begins where human control ends, because as long as we believe we can manage everything, we leave no space for God to move. Control gives the illusion of safety, but it also creates exhaustion. Many people are tired not because life is heavy, but because they are carrying what was never meant for human hands. The heart was designed for trust, not for constant calculation, fear, and pressure. When control dominates the soul, faith has no room to breathe. Human strength has limits. There is a line every person eventually reaches where effort is no longer enough, planning no longer brings peace, and knowledge no longer provides answers. That line is not failure. It is an invitation. God allows us to reach the end of ourselves so that we can finally encounter the beginning of His power. Faith is not denying reality. Faith is recognizing that God operates beyond what we can see, predict, or manipulate. Many prayers remain shallow because control remains deep. People ask God to bless their plans instead of surrendering to His will. But faith does not say, God, follow me. Faith says, God, I will follow you. The moment you release control, prayer changes. It becomes less about convincing God and more about trusting Him, less about urgency and more about confidence, less about fear and more about rest. When control ends, anxiety loses its authority. Anxiety feeds on the need to know outcomes. Faith feeds on the assurance of God's character. You may not know what tomorrow holds, but you know who holds tomorrow. That knowledge does not remove challenges, but it removes panic. It stabilizes the heart in unstable seasons and gives courage when circumstances offer none. Faith is not passive. It is active trust. You still work, still prepare, still move forward, but you do so without the burden of ownership over results. Control says, if this fails, I fail. Faith says, even if this fails, God remains faithful. That difference changes how you walk through setbacks, delays, and closed doors. God often waits for control to end before He reveals direction. When your hands are full, they cannot receive. When your heart is clenched, it cannot be led. Surrender is not weakness, it is positioning. It places you where grace can operate freely and wisdom can flow without resistance. In seasons of uncertainty, control demands answers, but faith learns patience. Some things are not explained because they are meant to be trusted. God does not rush to satisfy curiosity, but He is faithful to sustain obedience. Faith grows strongest not when everything makes sense, but when obedience continues without clarity. As 2026 approaches, many people are holding tightly to timelines, expectations, and outcomes. Faith invites you to loosen your grip, not because the future does not matter, but because God cares for it more than you ever could. When control ends, peace begins. When striving stops, guidance becomes clearer. When self-reliance fades, divine strength quietly takes its place, shaping steps, opening paths, and working beyond what the natural mind can measure. Prayer aligns the heart with God's future, because the greatest struggle in life is not opposition from the outside, but misalignment on the inside. Many people move forward with sincere intentions, yet feel constant resistance, not because God is distant, but because their hearts are out of rhythm with His direction. Prayer is the moment where that rhythm is restored, where the noise of personal desire quiets and the voice of God becomes clearer. When you pray, you are not informing God of what He already knows. You are allowing Him to reshape how you see what lies ahead. The future often looks frightening, because it is viewed through fear, past wounds, and human limitation. Prayer cleans that lens. It lifts your eyes beyond immediate circumstances and anchors your vision in God's promises rather than your assumptions. What once felt threatening begins to feel purposeful. Alignment always precedes movement. In the natural world, when something is out of alignment, friction increases and progress becomes difficult. The same is true spiritually. Many frustrations come from moving ahead without first pausing to pray. Prayer slows you down long enough for God to redirect your steps. It is not a delay, it is preparation. It prevents you from running fast in the wrong direction. Prayer also aligns your desires. Over time, what you once demanded, you begin to release. What you once resisted, you begin to accept. This is not loss, it is transformation. God does not force His will on a praying heart. He gently reshapes it until obedience feels natural and trust feels safe. When your desires align with God's future, peace replaces inner conflict. A praying heart becomes sensitive. Small warnings are noticed. Quiet instructions are obeyed. Opportunities are recognized before they become obvious. Prayer tunes the inner ear to divine guidance. You may not hear an audible voice, but clarity begins to form. Decisions that once felt confusing start to feel settled, not because every detail is known, but because the direction is confirmed within. Prayer aligns you with God's timing. Impatience is often the result of prayerlessness. When you wait in prayer, waiting no longer feels empty. It becomes active trust. You learn that God's delays are not punishments, but protections. He sees what you cannot see and arranges what you cannot arrange. Prayer helps you rest in that truth without rushing ahead. As the future approaches, many people pray only for outcomes, but alignment requires deeper surrender. Prayer shifts your focus from what you want God to do to who God is shaping you to become. It prepares your character for what is coming so that when doors open, you are ready to walk through them with humility and wisdom. When the heart is aligned with God's future, fear loses its grip. The unknown no longer feels hostile. Even uncertainty becomes a place of trust. Prayer does not remove the need for faith, it strengthens it. It anchors you in God's presence while your life moves forward, guiding your steps, ordering your thoughts, calming your spirit, and quietly leading you into the future He has already prepared. Surrender before the new season unlocks peace, because peace is not produced by favorable conditions, but by yielded hearts. Many people chase peace by trying to fix circumstances, control people, or predict outcomes. Yet true peace remains elusive because it is not found through management, but through release. God designed peace as a byproduct of trust, not effort. When surrender comes first, peace follows naturally. Every new season carries unknowns, new responsibilities, new challenges, new expectations. The mind responds by tightening its grip, attempting to secure certainty before moving forward. But the spirit thrives in a different way. It rests not in certainty, but in God's faithfulness. Surrender is the bridge between uncertainty and peace. It allows you to step into what is next without being crushed by the weight of what might happen. Surrender does not mean indifference. It does not mean passivity or lack of vision. It means acknowledging that God's wisdom exceeds your perspective. When you surrender before the season begins, you are saying that your confidence is not rooted in outcomes but in God's character. That decision settles the heart before pressure arrives. Many people wait for peace before they surrender, but peace does not come as a reward after surrender. It is released the moment surrender begins. The heart was not built to cower. Rye tomorrow's weight today. God invites you to release it early, before anxiety sets in, before fear grows strong, before exhaustion becomes normal. When surrender is delayed, the new season is entered with old burdens, unresolved worries, unfinished trust, lingering fear from past disappointments. These things contaminate what God intends to be fresh. Surrender cleans the vessel. It prepares the inner life to receive what God is about to pour out without distortion. Peace is not the absence of conflict. It is the presence of God's assurance. Even when circumstances are unstable, surrendered hearts remain steady. That steadiness is not emotional numbness, it is spiritual confidence. You learn to respond instead of react, to listen instead of panic, to wait instead of force. God often asks for surrender before revealing details. This is not to frustrate, but to protect. If you knew everything ahead of time, fear might overpower faith. Surrender allows you to move step by step, trusting that light will appear when it is needed. Peace grows not from knowing the whole path, but from trusting the one who leads it. As a new season approaches, surrender becomes a spiritual posture. You lay down expectations that limit God, timelines that pressure your soul, and comparisons that steal joy. You choose to enter the future unclenched, open, and willing. In that posture, peace is not something you search for. It becomes something you carry, shaping how you think, how you decide, how you speak, and how you endure, guarding your heart, anchoring your mind, and sustaining you as the new season unfolds. Trusting God releases fear of the unknown, because fear is born when the mind imagines a future without God in it. The unknown feels threatening only when we assume we will face it alone. Trust reintroduces God into tomorrow, and when God is present, fear loses its authority. Fear thrives on uncertainty, but trust rests in relationship, not information. The human mind wants details. It wants timelines, explanations, and guarantees. When those are missing, fear fills the gap. Trust does not demand full visibility. It depends on God's faithfulness rather than foresight. You may not see the next step clearly, but you know the nature of the one leading you. That knowledge steadies the heart when logic reaches its limit. Fear often disguises itself as wisdom. It warns, calculates, and predicts worst-case scenarios. But wisdom without trust becomes anxiety. Trust reminds the soul that God has already gone ahead, preparing what you cannot anticipate. The unknown is not empty space. It is occupied by God's presence, His plans, and His provision. Trust shifts how you interpret uncertainty. Instead of asking what could go wrong, you begin to ask how God might work. This does not ignore risk or deny difficulty. It changes the center of focus. Fear magnifies problems. Trust magnifies God. What you magnify determines what controls you. Many fears are rooted in past experiences. Disappointments, failures, and losses leave marks on the heart. When a new season approaches, those memories speak louder than promises. Trust quiets those voices by anchoring the heart in God's consistency. God may work in new ways, but His character does not change. Trust grows through surrender, not struggle. You do not conquer fear by arguing with it endlessly. You overcome fear by placing it in God's hands. Each act of trust weakens fear's grip. Each prayer of surrender strengthens spiritual confidence. Over time, fear no longer dominates decisions or dictates direction. The unknown tests where confidence truly lies. If confidence is rooted in circumstances, fear will always return. If confidence is rooted in God, peace remains even when outcomes are unclear. Trust teaches the heart to live without needing constant reassurance. It replaces urgency with patience and panic with expectation. God does not promise a future without challenges. He promises His presence within them. Trust accepts that promise as sufficient. You move forward not because the path is safe, but because God is faithful. That faithfulness becomes the foundation for courage. As the future approaches, fear may still knock, but trust decides whether the door is opened. You learn to walk into uncertainty without shrinking back. The unknown becomes a place where faith grows, where dependence deepens, and where God reveals Himself in ways certainty never allows, strengthening the heart, steadying the mind, and freeing the spirit to move forward without the chains of fear. Trusting God releases fear of the unknown, because fear is born when the mind imagines a future without God in it. The unknown feels threatening only when we assume we will face it alone. Trust reintroduces God into tomorrow, and when God is present, fear loses its authority. Fear thrives on uncertainty, but trust rests in relationship, not information. The human mind wants details. It wants timelines, explanations, and guarantees. When those are missing, fear fills the gap. Trust does not demand full visibility. It depends on God's faithfulness rather than foresight. You may not see the next step clearly, but you know the nature of the one leading you. That knowledge steadies the heart when logic reaches its limit. Fear often disguises itself as wisdom. It warns, calculates, and predicts worst-case scenarios. But wisdom without trust becomes anxiety. Trust reminds the soul that God has already gone ahead, preparing what you cannot anticipate. The unknown is not empty space. It is occupied by God's presence, His plans, and His provision. Trust shifts how you interpret uncertainty. Instead of asking,
"What could go wrong?" you begin to ask how God might work.
This does not ignore risk or deny difficulty. It changes the center of focus. Fear magnifies problems. Trust magnifies God. What you magnify determines what controls you. Many fears are rooted in past experiences. Disappointments, failures, and losses leave marks on the heart. When a new season approaches, those memories speak louder than promises. Trust quiets those voices by anchoring the heart in God's consistency. God may work in new ways, but His character does not change. Trust grows through surrender, not struggle. You do not conquer fear by arguing with it endlessly. You overcome fear by placing it in God's hands. Each act of trust weakens fear's grip. Each prayer of surrender strengthens spiritual confidence. Over time, fear no longer dominates decisions or dictates direction. The unknown tests where confidence truly lies. If confidence is rooted in circumstances, fear will always return. If confidence is rooted in God, peace remains even when outcomes are unclear. Trust teaches the heart to live without needing constant reassurance. It replaces urgency with patience and panic with expectation. God does not promise a future without challenges. He promises His presence within them. Trust accepts that promise as sufficient. You move forward not because the path is safe, but because God is faithful. That faithfulness becomes the foundation for courage. As the future approaches, fear may still knock, but trust decides whether the door is opened. You learn to walk into uncertainty without shrinking back. The unknown becomes a place where faith grows, where dependence deepens, and where God reveals Himself in ways certainty never allows, strengthening the heart, steadying the mind, and freeing the spirit to move forward without the chains of fear. Leaving everything to God invites divine order into 2026. Because chaos is often the result of carrying responsibilities that belong to God alone. When the heart tries to manage every detail of life, confusion increases and peace disappears. God is a God of order, and His order begins when human striving ends. The moment you release control, heaven's alignment begins to operate quietly but powerfully. Divine order does not mean that life suddenly becomes predictable or easy. It means that nothing is wasted, nothing is random, and nothing is outside of God's oversight. When you leave everything to God, even delays gain purpose, interruptions carry instruction, and closed doors protect you from paths that would have caused harm. Order is not always visible, but it is always intentional. Many people live in spiritual disorder not because God is absent, but because they insist on leading their own lives while asking God to follow. Leaving everything to God reverses that posture. It places Him at the center, not as an assistant, but as Lord. When God leads, priorities shift, decisions simplify, and distractions lose their power. Divine order begins within. Thoughts become clearer, emotions become steadier, desires become purified. When the inner life is ordered, the outer life follows. You begin to respond rather than react, to listen rather than rush, to choose wisdom over impulse. God's order does not suppress individuality, it refines it. When everything is placed in God's hands, timing falls into place. What once felt rushed begins to slow. What once felt delayed begins to make sense. God's timing is not driven by pressure, but by purpose. He arranges moments, connections, and opportunities with precision that no human planning could achieve. Leaving everything to God also brings clarity in decision-making. Instead of being overwhelmed by options, you begin to sense direction. Instead of second-guessing every step, confidence grows quietly. This confidence is not pride, it is trust. You know you are not walking alone, and that awareness brings stability. Divine order brings protection. Some things do not happen because God intervenes. Some relationships fade because they no longer fit the direction He is setting. Some opportunities disappear because they would have distracted you from what truly matters. Trusting God with everything allows Him to guard your future in ways you may never fully see. As 2026 approaches, leaving everything to God is not an act of desperation. It is an act of wisdom. It is choosing peace over panic, faith over fear, and obedience over control. When life is surrendered, God arranges it with purpose, aligns it with His will, and moves it forward according to His design, shaping each step, ordering each season, and establishing a foundation strong enough to carry whatever the future holds.